All right, now we're going to talk about the X-Men supports, which are totally awesome. I honestly thought that a lot of these cards would be kind of multiplayer only, but I've been getting a lot of mileage out of them. Cyclops is a really good platform for these because he can pull out a lot of allies, get a lot of value out of these various effects. And so I've had a lot of success with playing a lot of these cards, or actually all of these at least once, in Cyclops. So I wanted to talk about them because they are sometimes similar but different in really important and relevant ways. So they could be played in different times, they could be triggered at different times by different players. So I wanted to lay them out this way. First of all, they're organized in two general categories here. These four are cards that you can play in any form, and actually any hero of any trait or any alter ego can play these supports. You can put them in your deck and you can play them on the table. Cerebro has a play restriction. It says play only if your identity has the mutant trait. So honestly, I missed that quite often. I was playing this in hero mode all the time. So this basically means that Cerebro needs to be played in alter ego, which it does not share that with any of the other supports. Then these three supports all have in common the fact that their ability must be triggered from alter ego. Okay? But these two have a special ability that Cerebro does not share. So Cerebro says alter ego action. Exhaust Cerebro, search the top 5 cards of your deck for an X-Men ally. Search your whole deck instead if you control a psionic character, and add that ally to your hand. And it reminds us to shuffle, although that's part of the rule. So this is a really awesome ability. You have fairly good chances of hitting this if your deck is just chock full of allies. This is going to get even easier in the future when we get more. Also, Cyclops has pretty easy access to psionic characters. Your ID itself does not need to be psionic. You just need to have a psionic character in play. So that could be Professor X. That could be Cyclops' signature Phoenix ally. It could be Marvel Girl. We've got a handful of them and he can play all of them, which is great. You do need to control a psionic character, so having Phoenix, the hero, in play does not satisfy this. You, the controller of Cerebro, need to control a psionic character. It just doesn't need to be your hero. So Cerebro can only be used by its controller. That is not true of both X-Mansion and Danger Room. They both have a sentence at the end that says, any player whose alter ego has the mutant trait may trigger this ability. And those sentences really work as constant abilities that govern the entire ability of the card. We know that that's how they're intended to function. So X-Mansion is an alter ego action. Exhaust X-Mansion, heal 1 damage from a mutant or X-Men character. And any player who has the mutant trait may trigger this ability. So the controller of X-Mansion doesn't need to be the one who triggers it. The controller doesn't need to be in alter ego. The controller doesn't need to have such and such trait, actually. You could be a non-X-Men, non-mutant hero. You could control this, and you can trigger it in alter ego. Just the target of the healing needs to have the mutant or X-Men trait. Danger Room has a lot of things in common with X-Mansion. It's an alter ego response. After an X-Men ally enters play, exhaust Danger Room, search your deck and discard pile for a training upgrade and attach it to that ally. Any player whose alter ego has the mutant trait may trigger this ability. So this also, any player besides the controller who has the mutant trait may trigger it. If they're in alter ego, because it's still an alter ego response. Also, currently that's the only way to have the mutant trait. The controller does not need to have the mutant trait. The controller just needs to be in alter ego. But after any player puts an X-Men ally into play, they don't need to be played, they just need to come into play somehow. Some player at the table who is in alter ego, and if they don't control it, they have to have the mutant trait. If you control it, you don't have to have the mutant trait. You can trigger Danger Room, and the person triggering Danger Room is the person who searches their deck. When it says your deck, that's the person who triggers the ability. So you can't pull training upgrades out of somebody else's deck if you're the one who's triggering Danger Room. So where the training upgrade comes from is determined by who triggers Danger Room. But just what ally it goes on to is just whichever one you choose to trigger it relative to, and it chooses to attach to that ally. So X-Jet is kind of largely the opposite of these guys. Anyone can play it in any form, whatever, but it's a resource ability. It says exhaust the X-Jet, generate a wild resource for a player whose identity has the X-Men trait. And what makes this different from these is, generally speaking, you're only going to have the X-Men trait in hero form. So it's basically the opposite of these guys in that it's a support that only can be used when you're in hero form. Of course, the person actually controlling it doesn't have to be the person who's in hero form. It just needs to be someone with the X-Men trait. And of course, you can skirt that a little bit by putting honorary X-Men on your identity. That will give you the X-Men trait even when you're an alter ego. And then you can just use X-Jet all the time. You can also share it with your friends. Utopia also can be played by anybody, no matter what their traits are or what forms they're in. If each of your allies has the X-Men trait, increase your ally limit by 1. That's great. That doesn't care what traits you have. And its response, kind of unlike all 4 of these, can actually be used no matter what form you're in. After an X-Men ally enters play, exhaust Utopia, ready an X-Men character. So it's a little restricted because your ID might not have the X-Men trait if you're not in hero mode or hero form, but you can trigger this all the time. But unlike these 3, it's not something that you share with your friends. Only the controller of Utopia can actually trigger it. But that normally doesn't matter very much because it's a response and it's very not very conditional. So this is a great card. You should definitely play it if you haven't given yourself a chance. It's really helpful to have a full suite of allies, especially when you're making some of them sticky with trainings. And this ready is so strong, especially if you're in hero mode and you can get it on your hero with good stats.